All right, we're gonna get going. Look at all those heads pop up. Wow, I very rarely have that much authority in my own household, so thank you for all waking up. Maybe it's the coffee. My name is Craig Lagulier. I'm local, known as NC Tomato Man, maybe. I'm working with the Southeast Regional group to help them with their kind of organization facilitation over the 3 days. Maybe carve myself out a nice little useful role. That's up to Jared to decide. We're glad you're here. Today we have three really great speakers, Melissa, Edmund, and Ira, and they will be talking to you all about growing vegetable seeds in the Southeast, and I'll let them introduce themselves to you. And I'm going to have them turn around and look. So I want to ask a few questions. How many of you are seed savers?
Wow.
So I'd say about 80% of you. I don't have to ask how many of you aren't, because... anybody want to, how many of you are gardeners, home gardeners? How many of you are farmers? About 60%, 70% farmers. Those who are not seed savers, just a few ideas on why you haven't taken that plunge yet. And just speak up. Anybody want to say why they haven't been a seed saver yet?
Don't know enough and haven't really gotten there without keeping them separate.
Okay. So this is why not enough info and keeping pure. Good. This will help the this group to think about next steps and things like that. Anybody else who's not a seed saver yet want to add something to that?
Yeah, I'm spending most of my time just focusing on the plants themselves.
Okay. So not enough time. Thank you for that. Is there anybody who is interested in learning more about actually growing seed commercially and they haven't been there yet? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good, 6 or 7 people. So that gives our speakers a little bit of background, and we really appreciate that. So I'm going to turn it over to Melissa. I'm going to every now and then capture anything that you guys may ask that is really important for this group to know. So thanks for coming, and hope you enjoy the session.
Thank you. All right, so just a little bit about my story. So I'm from Gainesville, Florida, North Central Florida. Go Gators.
Go Gators!
I don't really do football or anything, so I don't know. I just feel like I have to say that. So the reason I got into seed saving, first as a home gardener and then as a small farmer, was because of this voluptuous squash called the Seminole pumpkin. I was growing it and I loved it so much. It did well in my climate, it tasted good, it had a long shelf life. It's a true southern heirloom. It came from the indigenous peoples of Florida who had been growing it and cultivating it for years. And I kind of realized that the only source of seed I had was from Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. And they were in small packets. And maybe the Seed Savers Exchange yearbook had a few people carrying it, and it kind of made me nervous that I might not be able to have this squash if, Southern Exposure suddenly didn't exist or had a crop failure. So I learned to save my own seeds because of this squash. And luckily with this squash, it's fairly easy. There's isolation considerations and a few things, but grow some squash, let them mature, wash off the seeds, dry them, you have seeds. So that was a good, easy gateway drug into seed saving for me. And then from there, it was a deep dive with no turning back. So, and I have a nonprofit in Gainesville, just as a little background, and we do seed, food systems work, literally from seed to plate. So we've recognized that seeds don't exist in a silo, that they're connected to education and community and land and soil and kitchens and chefs. Having trouble hearing me? Thank you. So that's what we do in North Central Florida. If you ever want to visit me, we're workingfood.org. So let's talk about saving seeds in the Southeast. So this is a really big topic. We could easily be here all weekend diving into this and have a whole semester course on seed saving. So this is just kind of a taste to get you learning about some of the fundamentals of seed saving to get you going. And then we're here all weekend to answer your more in-depth questions, of course. So the first question for me to new growers is always like, does this even work with your farm or garden plan? Because sometimes food versus seed production don't always mix. And sometimes they can. So Ira's got good examples of how she calls you can double dip, where you can grow market vegetables but still be a seed producer. But there's considerations, right? You have to consider extra time in the field. So things that are dry seeded crops, like a lot of your brassicas and lettuces, they're going to need a couple extra months in the field maturing to seed. If you have time for that, if you have space for that, is a consideration. And also sometimes leaving things in the field longer means there's more chances for disease and pests to build up. So you have to kind of be on top of that. You've got to think about cross-pollination. So a lot of small growers I work with are concerned about growing something like the Seminole pumpkin, for example, because they're also growing butternut squash or some other kind of squash that's the same species. And species have the potential to cross depending on what kind of crop they are. So for those farmers, it doesn't really work, because if they save seeds, they've got some kind of hybrid. So they've got to think about, well, do I want to just commit to this one crop? And then what are my neighbors growing? If you want to be a corn seed producer, you got to worry about who's growing corn around you for miles. So a lot of considerations to think about. And some plants really need a lot of flowering individuals in the population at the same time to have good seed sets. So you can't just have a few plants growing. You might need 50, 100, 200. With corn, the more the better. Do you have space to grow 200 collard plants for seed? So you need to think about these things. And then the first step is to get to know your plant pretty well. So the things that you want to start saving seed, you kind of have to learn a little bit about their biology to decide if it does fit in your farm plan and you want to go ahead and do it. So some of the basic questions are, is it even going to produce seed where you are? So for me in North Florida, there's things that I can't save seeds for. A lot of the biennial brassicas like kale and cabbages, even collards, don't reliably go to seed. Or by the time they do, it's April or May, and that's right when the thermostat starts cranking up in Florida and it's hot, and those poor little flowers get covered in aphids and disease, and it doesn't work for me. So I just cross those off my list. I don't even worry about them. So you got to know, ask local farmers and gardeners what they've noticed producing seed. And of course, some things are obvious, watermelon, squash, tomatoes, there's seeds inside, so they produce seed in your climate. You do have to learn its scientific name, and a lot of growers, this isn't anything you haven't looked at before, but this lets you know with that two-letter name, or two-word name, sorry, if that is the same species as something else you're growing on your farm, those have the potential to cross-pollinate depending on the plant, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So again, things like the squashes, are they going to cross-pollinate on your farm? Is it open pollinated or hybrid? So, and this is a really big topic too, because you can save seeds from hybrids, but that's a project. If you want to get really geeky about plant genetics and dehybridize a hybrid, you can do that. But for the most part, we're saving open pollinated seed. So that's a variety that if you grow it out in the field and you let it open pollinate in nature and you don't let it get contaminated with other stuff, when you save that seed and you grow it next year, it's that same variety. So just stick with open pollinated for the most part. How is it pollinated? Does it pollinate itself? Does it need insects to transfer the pollen around, or is it wind pollinated? And that has implications for how many plants you need to grow and how far apart you need to space them to isolate them. And then you need to know what the seed, harvest, and process method is, and if you're up for it and you have the equipment and the time to do it. And for the most part, when you're starting out small, you don't need any fancy, expensive equipment. Some buckets and bowls and spoons and colanders and some box fans will be just fine. But as you start scaling up into the commercial level, and we'll show you some pictures of what that equipment looks like, that would be helpful for you to have. So this is a very simplified chart, but it kind of gives you an idea for the broad range of how different plants are pollinated and how many plants you might need. Generally, there's no hard and fast numbers, more is always better, and how far apart they need to be spaced. So if we're looking on the left-hand side here, these are the plants that are typically called selfers. When you start reading more about seed saving, you'll see that come up a lot. Selfers, self-pollinated, inbred. So these plants have actually evolved to be inbred, so it's okay that there's fewer individuals in the population. That's how they've adapted. So things like lettuce, peas, and tomatoes, they're highly likely to pollinate themselves and not be crossed by other lettuce, peas, or tomatoes in the population, so you could grow a few different varieties of those nearby. You need much fewer plants, maybe 5 plants. As few as 1 works, but more is always better for lots of reasons that I'll talk about. And then you start moving along the spectrum. So things like beans, okra, peanuts, and rice, generally self-pollinating. They have the option to be visited by bugs and get pollinated. And then as we move further down, we've got on the far end of the spectrum things like corn that are highly outbred. They're crossers. They blow their pollen around on the wind, so they need to be really far apart from other corns. And ideally, you need a lot of them in the population. So I like to think of these plants, you think about like a dog or even a human that's been inbred, and you start to see poor characteristics showing up in the population over time, dogs with skin problems or like hip problems. It's the same with plants. If you let things like brassicas and carrots and corn get too inbred over time, meaning you grew too few individuals, they'll start looking deteriorated over time. So they want a lot. Any questions on this slide? I know it's a lot of stuff on the slide. Yeah.
There is even things like tomatoes don't want to have a certain number of plants.
Yep. And more is always better. So even with these inbreeding ones, like in theory, in some of the literature, like if you look at the the Art and Practice of Seed Saving book, which is my favorite one currently, they'll have 3 different population recommendations, and there's the minimum, which could be 1 plant for something like lettuce, peas, or tomatoes. But that's just, like, that's a really rare case to me. That's like you have so few seeds and you only got 1 plant and it's worth saving, so you do it. But 5, 10, 15, 25, 50 plants is even better. More diversity,
Yeah.
plus you get a chance to see in that population things you might want to select for. If I have 1 plant here versus on this farm I have 25, I'm going to see things in that population of 25 that might identify good characteristics I want to save seed from.
Melissa, one comment on that, as kind of the tomato guy, one of the caveat is there may be different reasons you're doing this. So if you're an heirloom saver and you have, I'll use the example of Cherokee Purple that was sent to me, there's traits for that tomato that you want to keep. And if you grow a large population and you start inadvertently selecting for a trait, you're now starting to create a new variety. It could have been inadvertent crossing, it could be a mutation, but over generations you kind of have Cherokee Purple as it was sent, but now you have this new variety that probably shouldn't be called Cherokee Purple anymore. It's Melissa's Cherokee Purple or Cherokee Sarasota, or wherever you're going to grow it. So you have to have your seed saver's hat on maintaining this variety pure versus I'm going to grow a population of these out and I'm looking for something that will be more beneficial for my climate, more beneficial for my market gardeners. An example is Alex Hitt at Peregrine Farms, where he got Cherokee Purple from me back in 1993. Here we are in 2019, and he has now got a selected strain that is smoother and larger, and his customers at the market would rather buy. So it's not really Cherokee Purple anymore. It's something that he has selected through the years to be something that fits his needs. It's just really to be careful about that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or else we will lose our varieties.
And that also, to me, highlights sort of like the excitement of saving seeds, is that you don't have to rely on Cherokee Purple from the 1980
Right.
accession. Like, if your land and your soil and your tastes and your preferences are different, you can start selecting that tomato to be what you want it to be,
Yeah.
which is really exciting. And we've been doing it for thousands of years, so.
Yep.
So I wanted to go through a couple of crops on the opposite side of that spectrum, an inbreeder and an outbreeder with you all, and that very detailed chart that I sent out that hopefully you can read. I know it's small print. Just to go through those basic questions, like what's its Latin name, how is it pollinated, and we'll work through these examples together. So if you want to pull out that chart, and we'll just holler out when you know the answer, and we'll try to go through these pretty quickly. So, Cherokee Purple tomato. So first we have to learn its Latin name. And it's alphabetized by the Latin name, not by. Solanum lycopersicum, very good. So that tells me that if I'm growing other Solanum lycopersicums, there's a potential they might cross-pollinate. I know a little bit about tomatoes, so we'll go deeper into that in a sec. Is it open pollinated or hybrid? Does anyone know this particular variety? Open pollinated, yep. So I'm like, good, I can save the seeds, it's OP. How are tomatoes pollinated? Yeah. Tomatoes they're selfing, but they have the option, some of them, to be visited by insects, and I'll show you the nuances of the flowers that tell us that. But they're mostly selfing or inbred, but sometimes visited by insects. I feel like the running joke in gardening and farming presentations, the answer is always, well, it depends. Depends on a lot. Depends on a lot of things. Mostly tomatoes are self-pollinating. How far do we have to isolate them from other Solanum lycopersicums? Look at the isolation distance on that chart.
35 feet.
Oh, so you're looking at Ira's chart, which is also helpful, but the big one. I heard someone.
10 to 50 feet.
10 to 50 feet, yep. And that's kind of just to be safe. And again, if you get to know your plants, you might be like, this plant's probably not going to cross-pollinate, so I can put them a little bit closer. But if you're going to be growing commercially for a seed company, you want to be more than safe, so further distances are better. How many plants should I be growing if I'm going to try to save seed from tomatoes? There's 3 columns there, different population. Pardon me? 5 to 10, yeah, that's a good one. But more is better. You know, in theory, you can say from 1 plant because it's an inbreeder, but if you had 20 plants, even better. 1 might fail. You know, you might find traits that are good in another one. And does anyone know about how you harvest and process tomato seeds? Here you do, yeah. So there's 2 basic seed processing techniques. There's wet processing, so those are seeds that come out of like a wet, moist fruit cavity, like watermelons, tomatoes, peppers, squashes. And then there's dry seeds, so brassicas, lettuces, beans, things that have a pod that dries. So the special thing about tomatoes is the seeds should have a fermentation step in order to properly save them. I'll show you pictures of that. So there's our summary of Cherokee Purple, the basics to learn how to save seeds. So here's the thing with tomatoes and why they might be selfers or they might be crossers. So the tomato flower on the left, has anyone ever seen a tomato flower look like that in your farm or garden? A few people. So a lot of the older heirlooms tend to have this shape, and if you learn a little bit about flower structure, which some of you might have learned yesterday with Myra's talk at the very beginning, the pollen receiving parts, or the female parts, are exerted out of this flower, which means it's more available for an insect to land on it and move pollen around. So if I had a couple varieties of tomatoes with that kind of flower, I'm going to be watching my bees to see if they're working those flowers, and I'm probably going to want to separate them further or isolate the flowers with a little bag to keep the insects out. Compared to flowers like this on the other end, where the anthers, which are the male parts, have actually fused around the entire reproductive structure, that is like a tiny little pinhole that would be really hard for an insect to access. So I feel like these flowers are kind of safe from contamination from other tomato flowers. So fermentation with tomatoes and squash seeds, I always go through this step. I find it helps, especially with tomato seeds. They're easier to store and share with people because I've had old timers just squeeze out tomato seeds on a newspaper and fold it up and give it to me, and it's so annoying because they stick to the paper and then you have to scrape them off. And this step not only removes that jelly coating and makes them easier to handle, but it also can remove some diseases that might be on that seed. It's really easy. You basically just squeeze them in a jar. If it's a really pasty, thick tomato, you add a bit of water. Otherwise, usually it's juicy enough. You stir it around a couple times a day. Really depends. You know, fermentation like beer and wine and kombucha, like depends on the temperature in your kitchen or wherever you're doing this. It goes faster when it's warmer, slower when it's colder. That scum is a good thing. It's all that floating material is dead seeds, and it's all the gelatinous covering around that seed that's floating to the top. And then it's just as simple as decanting it a few times, rinsing it, straining it, drying them. Never dry on paper except for coffee filters because it just sticks. Fabric. More wet processing seed examples, so squashes. This is a jelly melon. This is the fun thing about living in more tropical climates. I get to grow fun stuff. Kind of tastes like a cucumber, kind of tastes like a melon. Again, it's those seeds embedded in like a gooey, thick fruit. Okay, opposite end. So no longer wet seed processing or an inbreeder. Let's go through. Oh, that didn't work. It already had it on there, the name. Anyways, I thought this was all timed out last night. Anyways, so yellow cabbage collards. This is one of my favorite collard varieties. I can't always save seeds from it because in Florida I just don't know if collards are going to do it. Here they're about to do it. So, what's the scientific name of yellow cabbage collards? Brassica oleracea. Okay. Rats. All the answers are here on this one. I swear this worked last night. Open pollinated or hybrid?
Open pollinated.
Very good. Y'all are so smart. All right, so how does it pollinate? Outbreeding, very outbreeding. Insects love collared flowers. So what this means is that all other Brassica oleracea that might be growing nearby have the potential to be crossed with one another if they're flowering at the same time and they're close enough. So that doesn't just mean collards, but if you look at your chart for Brassica oleracea, who else is hanging out in that species? Broccoli, kale, cabbage, yeah, all those things. So this doesn't matter if you're a market grower and you're trying to grow broccoli for market and collards for seed, let's say, you probably don't need to worry about them even growing next to each other because you're probably going to cut that broccoli out before it even starts to flower, right? So that doesn't matter. It's only if they're flowering at the same time, same species. Isolation, so half mile from all other Brassica oleraceas. And these numbers are just rough guidelines. Again, the answer really depends. You know, if I have a really diverse farm and I've got tons of flowering things in between flowering plants that might cross, sometimes it's enough of a distraction from insects that they won't visit the other stuff. If you have physical barriers in between, like cages or buildings, sometimes you can get away with closer distances. If there's not a lot of things for the insects to visit on your farm except for your flowering brassicas, you might be in trouble and they'll cross. So the answer always depends. So bummed I messed this up. So how many do you need to grow in a population? Yeah, so that number 5, so the seed book that I got that from, that's like the minimum. Like maybe you have a really rare variety and that's all you could get to grow seeds from, and so you're going to save from those 5. That's not really ideal. If you kept saving from 5 collard plants for a few seasons, you're going to get them inbred. It's going to be bad. So more is better. 80 plus is a good ballpark to shoot for, but if you can do 200, 500, 1,000, even better. Just more genetic diversity. And they're dry harvested. They produce seed pods. So after this flower gets pollinated by insects, they produce little green seed pods that mature over time and dry. The thing about that process, especially in the southeast, is that they mature over time, so the plants don't all produce dry seed at once, so you have to pass through several times, maybe a couple times a week because it's humid or the rain's coming and you have seeds that are close, so you got to go through and harvest the seeds continually. And this is what a lot of brassica seeds look like in their pods once they're threshed out. And I use child labor for seed processing too. It's win-win, really. They like it. It gets a little messy, but those are some mustard seeds from Micanopy, actually. My new friend who grew up in Micanopy near me. More dry seed processing. So these are field peas. And I do have examples of stuff up here if you want to come and touch things and see what dry seed pods from different things look like. Anyone know what this one is?
I have a question.
Oh, yep.
On that.
Back.
Now, most these, I'm growing honeybees from Nigeria for the first time this year, just trying to see how they turn out. And exactly what you just said, that they mature over time, so you need to go through and pick up the dry ones. But this is my question: can you pick up the ones that are already ripe, but not necessarily dry?
Yes, and that's where this is as much of an art as it is a science sometimes. So I'm looking at the weather and it's going to be raining and the seeds aren't fully dry yet on the plant. Like I want them to mature on their mother plant as long as possible. But if they're almost ready, it's better to take them out of the field and dry them inside somewhere. Get them in front of a fan, put them in your house where it's drier. I do that a lot. And you start to learn the nuances of each plant. So with field peas, I can tell when the pod starts to get a little softer and it starts to shift colors, I can harvest it then and usually be safe with it drying inside. So yes.
Yes, there's a lot of people who have who bring seeds from places where they're traveling in very early literature. If you get sometimes it's things they just turn yellow. They don't look dry at all. They have mature seeds. So if you're in the condition of it's going to rain for a week, anytime that they have gotten a little flaccid and change tolerance for
Yeah.
we have a much higher probability of having good seed than if we let it sit there in the rain at that stage.
And I'm just wondering about volume. I don't know if everybody got to hear Ira's comments.
Oh yeah, so Ira was saying that, try to rephrase what you said. How, something with like cowpeas, the seed pod starts to get a little bit flaccid and change color. And you're better to get viable, healthy seed by harvesting it a little bit earlier than letting it sit out in the field where it's going to get rained on for a while and then it fully matures on the plant. Because then, especially in our climate, the fungus and all that stuff starts pretty fast, so you got to get them out of there. Anyone know what this seed is? It's another dry seed harvest. Lettuce, yeah. This one's kind of a pain. In all honesty, I really hate saving lettuce seed. Like, the sap is irritating to my skin. I get so dirty, and they're just a pain. They're fluffy, and there's dust everywhere. You need a mask. I really don't like saving lettuce seed, but everything else I do. And there's lettuce seed, so you can get specialized screens that are pretty inexpensive, but this one is nice with the longer slots because the longer seed just slides through, and you can see you get nice, cleaner seed, and you get rid of all the junk. And then this is pretty basic equipment that you don't have to spend a lot of money on. So we get a box fan out and we just rub the seeds a little bit in front of the box fan. You have to find the perfect distance, make sure you don't lose your seeds. Sometimes you can set up a few bins as a backup. And what happens is the seeds are heavier and they fall back down into the tray and the lighter stuff just blows off. And you can have machines for this too. So one final word before Edmund gets up. So I feel like one of the reasons it's really hard for people to grow seeds in the southeast, and perhaps why there's not a lot of seed producers, especially commercially, is our dang humidity. Like, it makes it so hard, especially with dry seeded stuff, to not have them rot in the field. So it can be a little bit more labor to go out there a couple times a week and harvest seeds as they're dry and be watching the weather and making sure that that whole season of trying to produce a seed crop, you don't waste it because you didn't get out there. So for me, sometimes that means like running out in the evening after work to like do an emergency harvest because we're about to rain or there's a hurricane coming, and so they got to get inside. Okay, that's not actually yours. You got to switch. Any questions on that while he gets his stuff over?
Do you mind sharing the seed?
I wish that I brought it. It's in my car. So it's called The Art and Practice of... It's written by
called the seed garden.
The Seed Garden, thank you. The Seed Garden, The Art and Practice of Saving Seeds. Yeah.
Okay. Jared, do you know what
That's
it
really
is?
just...
Did he?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's all the best talk. Got it.
I haven't done too much seed growing in the southeast yet, but I've done some in Northern California, and I've kind of been skeptical of trying to grow any dried seeded crops down here because of that rain and humidity. Have you played around with, or maybe Edmund, you can talk about it too, if you have, whether it's like harvesting the whole plant, if you have space, pulling the whole plant out and putting it under cover and letting it fully dry out.
I've done that a lot.
Or growing some of those dry seeded crops under plastic to mitigate rain, and if that's enough with the humidity still being high to let them dry down.
Yeah, I mean, I think high tunnels can help if it's worth the investment for you to invest in that. I've definitely pulled out entire plants of like arugula, radish, and then I just bring them inside the barn on a tarp and put them in a big like seed mountain with fans just blowing on it for a few days, and that's a good option too. And a lot of the immature seeds will have time to still draw sustenance from the mother plant while they're sitting there drying down, so that's definitely an option.
If you're gonna do that, you want to make sure that the dirt from the roots doesn't like get onto the tarp with the other stuff. Yeah.
Just like cheap PVC, and it's the cheapest plastic, that's 6 in plastic, is the cheapest plastic. Like the long release, like I guess it's like 1 inch PVC and 3/4 PVC to feel flexible. It's pretty easy to just keep some right around the farm, and if you really figure out go with the, like the 2 little kind of pieces of plastic.
Cool.
It's even home.
So I manage a farm called Twin Oaks Seed Farm in Louisa, Virginia. I've been doing it since 2008. It was started a couple years before I started working there. But we grow on 6 acres in rotation, and we grow seeds on contract for a number of seed companies. Southern Exposure Seed Exchange is the main one. Also, SoTrue, Fedco, Baker Creek, and Commonwealth Seed Growers is a seed project that I started with a few other people in 2014, and we sell seeds and we do variety trials, research, and breeding. But Twin Oaks Seed Farm is the place where we kind of have different entities for different things. Twin Oaks Seed Farm is the farm name. So what we grow is this, a list of a lot of the things that do well in the Southeast as far as seed crops. You can see there's a lot of wet seeded crops. We grow a lot of cucurbits, a lot of tomatoes and peppers. We also do we have quite a bit of dry seeded crops here. It tends to be larger dry seeded crops like lima beans, cowpeas, corn, okra. But we also have grown a fair amount of brassicas, often southern adapted brassicas like collards. We've had collards set great seed crops. I've also grown brassica varieties that didn't hold up to the rain and humidity. So something to be a little bit more careful with. So that's just like a quick intro to who we are and what we do. I'm going to jump right into seed contracts, and then after that we'll have a little bit more in terms of the farm bio, and then more information about wet and dry seed processing. I'm going to cover stuff that Melissa already covered, but probably from slightly different angles. So hopefully that'll be useful. So who's interested in doing seed production contracts? Cool. So it's definitely something that I think is a great idea to think about and pursue, but there's some things to be cautious about, and just a way to approach it carefully. Think about what you grow well already. What are your strengths as a farm? What plants do you love working with? Do you love working with southern peas? Do you love working with tomatoes or peppers? Think about what you actually have an isolation plot to grow. I'm going to show a slide on isolation distances in a minute. You want to really pay attention to what is being offered in terms of seed contracts. I recommend contacting a few different seed companies, seeing what they might have to offer, and just it can be hard when you're starting out. You're going to end up growing some things that maybe don't work that well. Sometimes the more experienced growers take the best contracts, and you might end up with something that doesn't really produce seed that well, and it might not be your fault at all. So approach it cautiously, and don't necessarily expect that anything that gets offered to you is going to be a really great option. So isolation distance is really essential for seed saving. There's a really good isolation distance seed saving guide at savingourseeds.org. There's a bunch of different, these were developed by Jeff McCormick, who is the founder of Southern Exposure. And there's guides to different crops. There's one for tomatoes, one for beans, one for peppers, and there's one for isolation distance. And I kind of go by that as a starting point.
So the thing we're passing around is an entire packet where the whole thing is available on Saving Your Seeds, and it's filled with information. So that's what you're going to see.
It's available for free. So. Okay.
Oh, you have to.
Yeah, I got it. So some examples, if you want to grow cucurbits for seed, you need quite a bit of space. So you're either going to want to, if you have a setup where you have multiple farm locations, that can be really helpful. But if you're already growing cucumbers for your CSA, you might have a hard time doing a cucumber seed crop unless you really have it worked out in terms of finding the variety that can do both. Tomatoes are going to be a lot easier to find a space on your market farm to do a grow out. Peppers, you want to be careful about hot peppers. They need more distance because it's really a disaster if the hot pepper crosses into the sweet pepper seed crop.
Really? I've sold a few of those plants to people and you get amazing feedback the following year.
Corn, you need a lot of isolation for corn if your neighbors might be growing GMO corn. If it's not GMO, you can get by with a lot less isolation. If you're in a location that has good isolation from GMO corn growers, you should definitely grow corn. It pays really well. Get like $7 to $10 a pound for corn seed. That's not contaminated. Hand pollination is an option for some things, but more on a sort of like more for breeding or for home seed savings, not really a contract thing. Prices that we get for seed grow outs. You can see there's a bit of a range for some of these things. You've got to look around at different companies. Baker Creek pays very well for peppers, but they don't pay well for tomatoes. Let's see. I don't know. Okra pays very well. If you can get okra grow out, you should do it. If you're good at growing beans, Southern Exposure has a big need for beans, especially pole beans. And they pay well, or pretty well.
Edmund?
Yeah.
I've heard about a discussion about the fairness to growers
Yeah.
of being paid by weight.
Yeah.
And will there be time at some point to talk about that?
Yeah. Should we do it now or should we do it later?
Why not now? We're right on it.
Okay. Okay. We get paid by weight, so it can be an incentive to not grow varieties that don't produce much seed. So, right now we have a seed system. We have a system that incentivizes growers to want to grow a really seedy pepper. Maybe that's not the best thing. If there was a different, I thought a lot about different kinds of incentive structures, and I'm not really clear on what the answer is. Yeah.
At the company that I work for, we pay growers not by weight but by sales. So they get a percentage of seed sales of that crop. So then a lot of growers, we're very, very, very small. We work with a very small number of growers, but the growers have the opportunity to promote the seed that they are growing. And that is usually the biggest increaser of sales and then therefore increaser of their profits.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I think that could be a good thing, except their company actually doesn't support itself as a company yet. And probably, when I heard about this, I thought, like we do with some of the things we do as fundraisers, like they give half to the grower. And I'm saying we can't actually pay all your bills that way. But it might be an excellent thing to, look at all, what I've been thinking of, look at all of your expenses and stuff and try to have it be as in the way when we put this one out, finding what actually divides the amount of money that comes in an equitable way for the amount of labor, which is more variable.
That's actually very true. It's very much like an experimental,
early stages, trying to figure out if that's something that can be profitable for a seed company, or if we should move into a different type of structure as far as the organization and moving into like a nonprofit structure. And so it's true, that structure has not yet been proven to be profitable. So it's something we're experimenting with. So it's more of a values-based choice than an economic choice for us at this point. So
Well, that's also
there are
discussion.
people who've been together.
That's True Love Seeds out of Philadelphia.
I'm just thinking for acoustics, the people in the back may be having trouble hearing. So if it's possible to stand and kind of face the audience, and I know it's not totally possible for all, but if that could be repeated so that way people can get the knowledge that's being shared, because it's good.
Sure.
I mean, it's more of a question for you all than necessarily an answer, but I know in some of the other, in some other areas of agriculture, there's a little more, cost plus based payment system where, and this is not necessarily something that's workable when you're very first starting out, but, if growers are keeping records of their costs, then all of a sudden that's a negotiating thing to say, okay, well, if you want me to grow this low yield pepper, then here are my actual costs. Pay me this plus X amount in order to make it doable. And then all of a sudden, then the seed companies have a real perspective on. Okay. But that requires record keeping and cooperative seed companies too.
Well,
Okay.
I was hoping we would come out of this with some kind of plan to gather that debt, because I feel like a blind person sometimes, leading a ship pretending like I know what I'm doing. Because you don't have enough data especially with
Time.
time, and if we had information for at least 3 grow out for more things, it would really be exciting to look at, how do we arrange this and what do we do?
Actually,
Can you paraphrase also what Ira said?
I was having a discussion with the little guy out there this morning. One of the things I'm hoping can come out of this summit is probably we choose a group of 3 or 5 that can work together and come up with the kind of data we're talking about here. Because right now, like I alluded to, the seed company just set a price. They don't have any data. No, they don't have enough data to come up with the price that they set. They set arbitrary pricing, and the growers have to take it. So maybe we can have a subcommittee or something like that, of 3 or 5, and as seed growers, we can come up with the cost of what, and of course those growers, hopefully they're growing different things, and we can come up with a ballpark figure of what it costs to grow peppers, what it costs to come up with eggplant seeds, and then there is going to be, everybody will have more information. If I as a grower am coming to the table with data of what it costs me, then the seed company, they have an idea of what they can make. Then we'll be able to negotiate a price that will be fair to all. That's one of my suggestions.
Yeah, go ahead.
So 2 things, I guess. One is I think for time reasons we might have to continue this conversation at the end or in further sessions. I would point out that for people who weren't here yesterday, we want to keep all these conversations alive, and there's a sign up there for our Southeast Seed listserv that will be a chance for people to be able to communicate online and share some of this and coordinate and cooperate. So before you leave today, that will be up here all day. If you want to participate, please put your name and email there. And then, I think we gotta probably keep going.
Yeah, okay. All right, so just a few things about getting contracts. Different seed companies come out with their plans at different times in different ways. Some of them will give a list of everything they need and you can pick from it, and some of them will just assign you something. Let's see.
Can you tell us what time of year this happens?
This happens anytime between late November and March. Yeah. Southern Exposure usually comes out with their list in around New Year's, which is great. Just a little bit more about the seed crop yield data. I keep yield data on not only crop types but on varieties, so I can plan how much to plant. It's good to, I wish I had a resource ready for people to hand out about that, but there's something you could contact me about, some baseline yield data for seed crops. But also, it would be great to have more interaction with the seed company about that regarding the prices. So I'm just gonna do a really quick run through of a few more farm pictures. So the greenhouse, this is actually a pretty old picture. Hoeing some okra, this was a huge okra seed crop we did. Cultivating some squash. Harvesting some peppers. Harvesting winter squash. We do a lot of butternut seed growing. This is a variety that we bred called South Anna, and we grow it for produce. We grow it for seed, for Commonwealth seed growers, and for Southern Exposure. There's like larger scale harvest. There you are on the truck with the squash. We also do variety trials on our farm, and some of that is grant funded. I'll be talking more about that at a workshop tomorrow, but that's not a focus of this one. Variety types, Melissa went over this just a bit, but the difference between open pollinated, hybrid, GMO. I think we don't have time to go over that. Wet seeded crops. These are tomatoes curing. I had trouble with tomato germination for a few years, and I started a process of doing a little bit more curing. So often I'll harvest them, I'll let them sit and get really ripe. There's more of them sitting around. This is a whole picture. So curing to the mashing in a bucket. We use buckets for almost everything, and actually I've tried a lot of different things. I tried immersion blenders, and I found that just mashing them with a 2x4 or a couple 2x4s works really well.
Tomato abuse.
And so here's a bunch of ferments all going at the same time. I think this is mostly tomatoes. Peppers don't really need a lot of fermenting, but sometimes we'll do half a day or a day to help get them off the cores, get the seeds off the cores.
Do you not use yeast for tomatoes?
We don't use yeast. Yeah, it's I guess it's hot enough and yeasty enough in our seed run, but it's all right. And ferments all have different times, and it's also temperature dependent. I think I have a slide about that. So reasons to ferment: it breaks down germination inhibiting gel that surrounds the tomato seeds and the cucumber seeds. Other seeds don't necessarily all have that, but it can help control bacterial diseases, including bacterial canker on tomatoes, bacterial fruit blotch on watermelon. It breaks down solids and makes seed separation easier. The duration of the fermentation depends on temperature, but in the summer, this is just a general guideline. 2 to 3 days for a lot of things, including cucumbers, melons, watermelons, tomatoes. I like to stir the ferments twice a day to prevent mold from forming on the surface. I think it helps with germination to not have the mold on the surface. I'm not sure. It's,
Good question.
yeah.
Is this done in some sort of temperature controlled environment, or is it just like open air, put some over top of it, let it just ferment?
Yeah.
I'm just wanting to.
The ferments are done in open air.
Open air. Okay.
Yeah.
So I got plenty of open air.
Yeah. Good.
But not where there's rain.
No, not
Yeah.
rain or anything.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, like in a barn or anything.
Do you have any problem with flies? Because one of the things, I mean, I'm usually fermenting 100 varieties at a time, and if
Yeah.
the flies get in, they lay eggs, so you're separating tiny little maggots sometimes from the seed. So I have to actually keep, flies get, this stinks. This is the worst smell you will ever smell in your life when this is
That's
happening.
not true.
That's true.
Oh, there are worse smells.
Maybe there's worse smells. But the flies get fascinated with this stuff.
I do have trouble. People love to talk about smell.
Yeah. I've got myself on a detour, sorry.
The question is whether I get problems with flies in the ferment. That does happen, but usually when I let them go too long, usually in the 2 to 3 days, that doesn't happen.
You can cover it loosely
Yes.
with a lid.
Oh yeah.
You can cover it in all sorts of
I use
ways.
paper towels,
Yeah.
actually.
This is
Loosely.
yeah, loosely with a lid.
Yep.
You can do this like outside where it's getting rained on as long as you're covering it with a lid.
Yep.
But I want to point out something. All these buckets have labels on them. It's really important. I'm not saying I always put a label, but almost always put a
I
label.
thought that was a sweet pepper.
Yeah, and if you want to put the date, so I put variety abbreviation, I put the harvest date, and I put the ferment start date, because those aren't always the same date. And the organic certifiers want to know the harvest date in particular. But it's good information to keep all that.
What kind of ink do you use? Because these look like you reuse them.
Masking tape and Sharpie.
Oh, okay.
Quality masking tape, yeah.
Because you can erase them, you reuse the buckets.
Rip the tape off.
Yeah, just rip the
Right
tape
on
off.
tape, put the tape
On
on
the
the
tape,
bucket.
there's tape right there.
Just masking tape.
Can you see that?
Okay. Okay, now I see because you mentioned it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just because you brought up the organic certification process when we were talking about economics earlier, I was just wondering. Sorry. I was just wondering about the prices that you get for organic seed versus seed if you're not certified organic, and if it makes it worth it.
Yeah, for seed contracts, it gives you more options to be organic certified, which it can be important. But Baker Creek, for instance, doesn't need organic certified, and they pay a similar rate to a lot of the organic seeds we sell. So I don't have a clear answer for that. It's helpful if you're doing enough.
Edmund, we're running
Yeah.
out of time.
There's a lot of discussion. Okay.
We're gonna have all
Okay. I want to show real quick how to pour out a ferment. This is hot peppers. And there's pouring it out. I don't know. I guess we don't have.
Is that a mix? This is
What's
sweet,
that?
okay.
Just to be clear, you filled up that bucket multiple times. You're showing
Yeah,
a couple of steps of adding water and dumping
And
out.
actually, for hot peppers, I do this thing where I spray the seeds through a hardware cloth into a bin. That's a way of separating seeds.
And it creates a dangerous, powerful capsaicin cloud that makes you cough and ill.
I like growing hot peppers, seed contracts, I shouldn't tell you that. So I put on these screens, and I put the screens on drying racks in a dehumidified, air-conditioned room. I really like the air conditioner dehumidifier combination, and I like this kind of design with the fans blowing across the screens.
You look serious too.
I know.
Serious about those.
I was tired.
Right, yeah.
This is the same setup in a different spot, similar setup. Sweet peppers, the seeds are a lot more prone to rot than hot peppers. But the good thing about sweet peppers is you can eat the sweet pepper and get the seeds. So if you want to do that, it's a good option. Otherwise, hot peppers are probably better to produce if you want to make money.
You can make some good money making pepper jam with your peppers.
Yeah.
If you have one of those little kitchens that you can
Melon is another one that you can get the seed out and eat the fruit also. That's something to think about. Peppers, melon, winter squash, maybe tomatoes. Harvest timing for wet seeded crops, you want them to be as ripe as possible but not rotting. And either curing in the field or indoors can be important to make that happen. Watermelon processing. Really fun. Let's already cover this. Dry seeded crops. There's a lot of dry seeded crops that can do very well, but again, you have to go through multiple times to keep stuff from molding. So if we were out in Colorado, you could just come through once with a combine, but in the Southeast, we pick it by hand twice a week. And here's a drying setup in a greenhouse with a tarp over it to keep it from getting too hot. Threshing. This is a great way to clean seed is to use the dance party. Yeah. And this is winnowing. Honestly, between a 5-gallon bucket and box fan and a little bit larger fan and some bins, that's baseline equipment that you can do a whole lot with, even on a several acre scale. Okra, these are some turnips. Peanuts, if you're good at growing peanuts, you might think about growing them for seed because they pay pretty well. If you're already good at growing it. Corn. I think I'm going to stop there.
Yay!
Yeah.
This is the seed garden. We're going to pass it around if you haven't seen it. There's an older book called Seed to Seed, which is also good for looking, at this. So
Nope, that's.
I'm just going to show you a few pictures of some funky, inexpensive equipment that you might could use. And okay.
Is this it right here? Slideshow. There we go.
So this is one of those homemade from internet plans, and I think that on the one-page seed saving guide, that home seed saving guide, that there's links to where all this stuff is there, and at the end you can look at some hard copies of some of these plans.
I think you're gonna have to speak up as much as you can to get to the people in the back.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we don't have a mic for this room, unfortunately.
Okay, so here's that plan, and there's a bunch of other. Here's a really nice tabletop clipper. They cost a lot of money unless you get it used. They even cost a lot of money when they are used, if they're in good shape. But it's a nice thing to have.
What is it?
Tabletop clipper.
Tabletop.
And it has like all those expensive screens that you can get to. But there's a place called Commodity Traders International that sells a lot of that stuff used. And then it's expensive but not so ridiculous.
It's for cleaning grain and beans and stuff like that.
Dry seeds mostly. It works with a lot of different things. This is Melissa. They made this from the plans. I guess those English guys put that plan on. And lots of people are really liking that. I have this fantasy that we're going to have by next year somebody do a workshop where we put one together.
Yeah. And I will say about that design, so our seed program works with adults with disabilities, so a lot of the stuff we build is accessible, and that's a perfect example where someone can just sit there in a wheelchair and crank through seeds for a while, and it's real easy.
It's good for old people too.
Yes.
Here's another, it's not a cooker actually, anyway, it's one of those style cleaners that was older out of a barn for $100. So if you're a little handy, you can get those. And they haven't changed in 100 years. So you can actually go online and get how to fix them up. It's amazing. In addition to actual seeds for seed, there, are various, alliums and other things like turmeric and ginger and stuff that people, work with, especially in their local areas. And one of the things I personally like to do for Southern Exposure is help people think through what they have that they can do something more with. And this guy does dryland onions in Texas, like so many, it's great. That's yellow potato onions. That's a traditional southeastern multiplier onion, and the picture got wrong, but that's okay. Anyway, imagine they grow like a shallot, and these are, there's some up in the corner of that picture, so where you can actually see them. And if you're good at growing these things and have good production, there's really a lot of market need for these, so think about those. And they can be grown and sold actually for a good price just as produce, more than other things. And things like Egyptian walking onions and stuff that are in a way common, but not so commonly actually, more limited in being available for sale. And you're not going to grow your sweet potato slips like this, but I'm pointing out that there's a lot of different varieties, and sometimes that can be quite a market niche that you can do. Like with our main grower, we sell small amounts to our customers, and we directly have him pass the information for big farmers who want a lot. And I think he makes as much money from the big orders that he sells direct as he does stuff that he sells to you. So if you're working with the seed company, work your deals. This is my favorite thing. There's some up here. This is hibiscus saberica. You can pick things that are unusual, and in some ways, some of the tender tropical perennials for people in the Southeast offer some potential for seed growth, and it's definitely something where value-added products are available. And then, these things, if you're a storyteller, this is something which you don't think of, and I don't know if other companies do this, but we pay some growers who take pictures to take pictures, to write about things, and to help promote, and that this is a part of the business that sometimes just, you don't have farmers, but I'm finding more and more farmers who have that as a skill, and it's a good value-added place to be. And with herbs and flowers and stuff like that, if you're trying it out, this is a place where the amount needed by the companies are smaller, the amount of space that you have to devote to it is smaller, and if you kind of are already save herb and flower seeds because you're into it, to try out those things, because there are more potential possibilities for having it for pollinators and this, that, and the other, but you kind of have to be a little bit on the entrepreneurial side of pushing also the project that you want to have. And this is a flower with a story, Tina James' Evening Primrose, which I was just in a hurry. It's beautiful, you can have primrose parties and stuff, but the thing that you can do is, get people excited in your area about this thing, and then you have all these crazy pods. Again, bring them in before the rain, stand them up, let them finish drying, and sucking all that nutrients out of that big stem. Collards, Did I mention I need people to go to college? Not just me, social needs some college too. Everybody needs college. And we need to rise up our college. So I brought some hard copies of some of the seed guides. If you live where the internet doesn't treat you right, you can take one. But if you live where you can get good internet, download it and have it on your network. It's easier, doesn't weigh as much, doesn't waste paper. And yeah, I think that might be my And this is a big field. You know, I tell you about the double dipping. These people really were the first ones that I know. They do a collard festival in this town, grow all these collards, sell them to the restaurants, and then sell collard cheese. You have to go to Aden. They won't send them. They won't mail them. You have to come to Aden to get the collard cheese. It's crazy. Okay, so that's all I had to say. But other than I have some info if you're interested in thinking about growing seeds for southern exposure, and we admit that we don't really know the right way to do about pricing, and since we're looking at our practices of equity and stuff like that, you can help us with thinking about pricing, because we sort of thought we knew something, and then you find out you don't know nothing. So we're
Maybe
all
you keep
working
the
together.
records.
So let's work together, friends, to get data and make a more equitable system. The winning formula is not for anybody to be on top, but for all of us to rise up.